Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour. A little less than 2 weeks ago, I announced Canada's immigration levels plan for the next 3 years. It's a bold plan that is focused on filling the urgent labor shortages of our economy today with the talent, skills, and experience of newcomers who will help accelerate our recovery and drive Canada's economy forward. As we continue the fight against COVID-19, we are taking an all hands on deck approach in our hospitals and long-term care homes so that Canadians can get the health care and the treatment they need. This is where immigration has proven to be a lifeline. More than a third of our family doctors, nurses, and pharmacists have come from abroad and are already contributing on the front lines. As our healthcare workers fight the second wave, our government is ensuring that we have the people we need for a second shift. That's exactly what our plan will deliver. Whether it's in health, the trades, or increasingly in the tech sector, hardworking newcomers are rolling up their sleeves and contributing in the fight against COVID-19. Over the course of Canada's history, immigration has not only grown our population, it has also helped to create jobs. 1 in 3 businesses with employees in Canada is owned by an immigrant. In turn, these entrepreneurs employ over 250,000 people across the country. As we look to recover and build a prosperous future, we will continue to look for highly skilled people from around the world. And that includes places like Hong Kong. Alors que nous nous tournons vers la relance économique et l'attraction de la main-d'œuvre dont le Canada a besoin pour un avenir prospère, nous continuerons de rechercher des personnes hautement qualifiées de partout dans le monde et nous nous tournerons vers des endroits comme Hong Kong. The ties that bind Canada and Hong Kong run deep. The first Hong Kongers arrived on our shores over 150 years ago to build a better life for themselves. As early as the 1880s, steamships plied the Pacific between Vancouver and Hong Kong, bringing people and goods from one continent to another. In the Second World War, Canadians bravely defended Hong Kong, and over 500 paid the ultimate sacrifice. And through the second half of the 20th century, thousands of Hong Kongers made Canada their home and made our country stronger. Today, hundreds of thousands of Canadians live and work in Hong Kong. Here in Canada, Hong Kongers have gone on to success in all walks of life, from business leaders to serving as our Governor General. As proud as we are of our relationship with Hong Kong, we find ourselves at a challenging moment. Canada remains deeply concerned about China's passage of the new national security law. We have unequivocally stated that this legislation and the unilateral powers within it are in direct conflict with China's international obligations and undermine the one country, two systems framework. Just yesterday, we saw 4 democratically elected representatives expelled from the Hong Kong legislature. Actions such as these demonstrate a clear disregard for the basic law and are having the consequential effect of eroding human rights in Hong Kong. In this time of trial, Canada will stand in solidarity with the people of Hong Kong. Le Canada est grandement préoccupé par l'adoption de la nouvelle loi sur la sécurité nationale à Hong Kong et par la situation des droits de la personne qu'on y observe, laquelle continue de se détériorer de jour en jour. Le Canada et Hong Kong entretiennent des liens nombreux et étroits et nous demeurons solidaires de la population de Hong Kong. In response, Canada has introduced a number of concrete measures, including the suspension of our extradition treaty, restriction of certain goods, and revision of travel advice to Hong Kong. And as my colleague, Minister Champagne, has said, we will continue to watch the situation closely. As daily life for Hong Kongers continues to unfold under a cloud of uncertainty, we have a unique opportunity to appeal to the hopes and aspirations of those who may well be casting their eyes abroad and looking at Canada as a place to live, work, and settle as generations have before them. Which brings me to the reason why we are here. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we are creating new and expedited immigration pathways for those living in Hong Kong to come to Canada. This initiative will focus on 3 areas. First, we will seek to attract and retain recent Hong Kong graduates and workers with much-needed skills for our economy. Second, we will promote, prioritize, and support existing immigration routes for family members, students, and workers. And third, we will introduce several targeted measures to enhance the protections offered by our asylum system. Today's announcement falls within our new levels plan, which is aimed at attracting the best and the brightest from around the world. Aujourd'hui, j'annonce un certain nombre de mesures qui permettront aux résidents de Hong Kong admissibles de venir au Canada grâce à un permis de travail ou d'études et de bénéficier d'une nouvelle voie d'accès par laquelle ils pourraient y demeurer de façon permanente. To attract Hong Kongers from abroad, we are going to expedite the processing of work permits for those with recent graduate experience who wish to come to Canada to work or continue their studies. This stream will allow recent Hong Kong graduates to apply for an expedited open work permit valid up to 3 years. To be eligible, Hong Kongers must have graduated from a recognized Canadian or overseas post-secondary learning institution in the last 5 years. If approved, their spouse or partner, as well as children, will also be eligible to apply for a study or work permit. We have already seen an increase in applications under the International Student Program from Hong Kong and will continue welcoming these bright students to our colleges and universities. But we don't just want them to work or study here temporarily. We also want them to consider staying. That's why we will also create 2 new permanent resident pathways under this initiative. The first stream will apply to Hong Kong residents who are in Canada and who have graduated with a degree from a recognized Canadian learning institution in the last 3 years and who have completed at least 50% of their courses in Canada. The second stream will apply to Hong Kong residents who are in Canada and who have graduated with a degree from a Canadian learning institution or a recognized post-secondary learning institution from abroad in the last 5 years, and who also possess 1 year of full-time work experience in Canada within the last 3 years. Once eligible under the open 3-year work permit, Hong Kongers may then qualify under Stream 1 or 2 or existing PR programs. Other language and admissibility requirements will also apply. Once eligibility requirements are met, these recent graduates can then directly apply for permanent residence. We plan to welcome the first recent Hong Kong graduates under this program in early 2021. In addition, we will also continue our efforts to attract young and skilled Hong Kongers by promoting and prioritizing existing programs, including the International Student Program, which was revived on October 20th, 2020, the International Experience Program, and the Canada-Hong Kong Youth Mobility Agreement, as well as our Economic Permanent Residency Program. Let me say a few words about a number of other measures which are also part of today's announcement. Canada has a robust asylum system that is internationally recognized for defending human rights and offering safe harbor to the world's most vulnerable. And this is thanks in large part to the generosity and compassion of the Canadian people. As we continue to monitor developments abroad, we are aligning our policies in two areas. First, we are waiving the usual one-year waiting period so that failed asylum claimants from Hong Kong may access faster pre-removal risk assessments. This means that some who were previously ineligible may now qualify for another assessment and another chance to stay in Canada. And second, no one will be prohibited from claiming asylum or applying to any other immigration program in Canada solely by virtue of having been charged under China's national security law. Let me be clear. Foreign nationals will be permitted to seek asylum in Canada as long as they have not committed any crime that would be recognized under Canadian law. The measures we've announced today build on our immigration plan, which is focused on our economy, jobs, and growth. This initiative will create new opportunities, strengthen ties, and build new and lasting bridges between Canada and the people of Hong Kong. They complement our government's previous measures, as well as the efforts of our allies around the world. Many from Hong Kong have and will continue to look to Canada as a place of hope and opportunity. Les mesures que nous avons annoncées aujourd'hui s'ajoutent à la réponse rapide de notre gouvernement ainsi que les efforts des alliés du monde entier. Dans le passé, de nombreux Hongkongais se sont tournés vers le Canada comme un lieu d'espoir et d'opportunité. Le Premier ministre s'est engagé à proposer une réponse pan-gouvernementale à la loi chinoise sur la sécurité nationale à Hong Kong et ces mesures donnent suite à la promesse que nous avons faite cet été. The people of Canada and Hong Kong are close friends, and friends look out for one another. We have a special opportunity to welcome Hong Kongers who will once again help to build our country going forward. Today's announcement is the first step towards realizing that opportunity. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now begin the media Q&A portion of the event. As usual, one question and one follow-up. State your outline who you're with. We're going to start with the phone. So, operator, could you please have the first question from the phone?
Certainly. Thank you. Please press star one at this time if you have a question. Veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 pour toute question. Notre première question est de Boris Proux du Devoir. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour. Je vais poser ma question en français, si ça ne vous dérange pas. Je veux savoir, l'ambassadeur de Chine au Canada a déjà mis en garde le Canada sur l'établissement, sur l'accueil en fait de nouveaux réfugiés de Hong Kong ici. Je veux savoir si vos mesures ne risquent pas de choquer en fait les Chinois et si le Canada est prêt pour ça.
Well, I will reiterate what the Prime Minister said, and that those comments by the Chinese ambassador were unacceptable. Today's announcement is focused on attracting the best and the brightest young Hong Kong recent graduates to contribute towards the urgent economic needs which exist today in Canada. It is in line with the immigration plan, which I announced a little less than 2 weeks ago, and it's aimed at strengthening the people-to-people ties between Canada and Hong Kong, at creating and expanding opportunities for those Hong Kongers who may wish to build a better life here in Canada, and about building long and lasting bridges.
And second, how many of the 100,000 of Hong Kongers, of Canadians living in Hong Kong, do you plan to attract with this measure? And aren't you afraid that they later on in Canada receive threats from the Chinese government?
We continue to watch the situation with grave concern in Hong Kong, and as I said in my remarks, today's announcement is set against that backdrop. But what we hope is achieved by today's announcement is that those young Hong Kongers will see an opportunity in this initiative. Those Hong Kongers who are hoping to find a job, continue their studies, ply their trade, use their experience to help in our economic recovery, as well as driving our long-term prosperity. It's about strengthening the people-to-people ties between the people of Canada and Hong Kong, which have existed for many, many years, and which through this policy, we hope we will continue to strengthen going forward.
Merci beaucoup. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Merci. Our next question is from Ryan Tumulty from the National Post. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Yeah, good morning, sir. I understand, I should say, your programs today seem to be targeted largely at younger people. I'm wondering if you're, in essence, trying to fill in the gaps for people in Hong Kong who do not have the British National Overseas designation that might allow older people to leave Hong Kong but wouldn't allow younger people to do so.
Well, certainly, we are endeavoring to meet the urgent labor gaps which exist here in Canada, and nowhere is that being felt more acutely than on the front lines of our healthcare system and long-term retirement homes. And as I mentioned during my remarks, we already have 1 in 3 healthcare workers who have come from abroad. And by creating and launching these new immigration routes today, we are expanding on those opportunities. We're expanding on them by ensuring that there is a way in which they can come to Canada through a flexible open work program, and then allowing them to transition to stay in Canada to become permanent residents. This will meet some of those needs in our healthcare sector. And as we fight a second wave, we want to be sure that we are leveraging immigration to provide the necessary reinforcements so that Canadians can get access to the healthcare, the support, and the treatment that they need.
Question?
Okay, sir. And just to follow up, sir, how do you plan about marketing this program in Hong Kong, given some of the restrictions on media there?
Well, as I said, we do plan to embark upon a promotional campaign, but we will also continue to ensure that here in Canada, as there may well be a number of Hong Kong residents who are already here, either studying or working, who are eligible under one of the 2 streams that I mentioned to apply for permanent residency. And in that respect, they may be well positioned to become integrated into our economy so that they can contribute in our response to COVID-19, as well as meeting the long-term demographic challenges and prosperity challenges which we face. And that's why I say that today's announcement is very much in line with the bold immigration plan that I announced just a little less than 2 weeks ago.
Have our final question from the phone, operator.
Certainly. Our next question is from Stephen Chase from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hello, Minister. I have a question about things that might hinder applicants from coming to Canada. You mentioned the national security law, which was only introduced in late June, and you said that applicants would not be hindered in their application if they had been charged under that law. Only a few dozen people have been charged under that law, but many thousands of people, thousands and thousands and thousands, were charged in connection with the protests, which began a year earlier and continued, for much of the last year. These people face what are called rioting charges. That's the antiquated term for protests, and that is also something that would hinder them from coming to Canada. Will charges for the protests that began in June 2019 be a hindrance for people to gain access to Canada?
Well, thank you for the question, Steve. And I just want to underline again that no one will be disqualified from making a legitimate asylum claim in Canada by sole virtue of having been charged under the new national security law, and nor will they be in any way hindered from availing themselves under any other immigration route by virtue alone of having been charged under national security law. As I also made clear during my remarks, Steve, I was very clear in saying that no foreign national, whether from Hong Kong or anywhere else, will be disqualified from pursuing a legitimate asylum claim or any other immigration route if they have not committed any crime that would be recognized under Canadian law. We remain very concerned with the situation in Hong Kong. And as I said, that is very much the backdrop to this announcement today. But at the same time, what we are highlighting is that in these new immigration routes, we see a silver lining for young Hong Kongers who may wish to come to work in Canada, study in Canada, bring their families to Canada, and build a better life in Canada. And that is very much in keeping with the long-standing warm relationship between the people of Canada and Hong Kong.
Follow-up?
And if I may ask a follow-up question, this announcement talks about economically useful migrants, but I don't see anything here about asylum claims. And that is, if you are a Hong Konger living in Hong Kong and you have no Canadian relatives in Canada, the current COVID restrictions, I would think, because they prevent tourism, would give you no means of getting to Canada. So how does what you announced today help people in Hong Kong who would like to seek asylum?
Well, thanks again for the question, Stephen. I would begin by saying that Canada has a robust asylum system. It's a system that has been consistently recognized internationally as defending human rights. We have the capacity to hear those claims, those legitimate claims, and they are adjudicated by a tribunal that is independent from the government. It is not a political process. Although we are in the midst of a second wave in the pandemic, we continue to resettle the most urgent cases in partnership with our international friends and allies, and we will continue to do that work, which is also built on the strength of the compassion and the generosity of Canadians.
Merci. Nous allons maintenant prendre 3 questions de la salle, en commençant avec Mackenzie Gray de CTV.
I'm Mr. Mackenzie Gray with CTV. The Prime Minister first brought up the issue of immigration in Hong Kong in July. And now we're here in November. The decision's finally been made. One thing that's changed recently has been Donald Trump has seemingly lost the election. Did the government wait until there was a new president to bring in these measures?
Well, thanks again for the question, Mackenzie, and I know you raised it a little less than 2 weeks ago. We took the time that was necessary to ensure that this plan could be launched in the right way. We wanted to be sure that we had our immigration levels plan announced. As I said, that this announcement today is very much in line with that plan. It seeks to attract young Hong Kongers, recent graduates who possess the skills that are necessary to fill the urgent labor needs of our economy today, including in the healthcare sector, which is so desperately needed reinforcements to support Canadians. But in addition to that, whenever we have taken decisions like this, we have always done so in a way that ensures that we have the necessary additional resources at the border. That includes public health care and safety resources. So we took the time that is necessary, but we are confident that going forward, we're going to be in a position to welcome those who are eligible under this policy by early 2021.
To follow up on Steve's question, which you didn't answer, about asylum claims, there are many people, as Steve mentioned, who have been charged under non-national security related issues who would face issues coming to here. And from what I've read so far and what you've said, it doesn't seem that there's a clear framework for bringing people who are, essentially political prisoners in essence to come to Canada. So I just want to get a clear declaration from you that you are telling people if they are worried that they could be arrested for political issues, that they are going to be welcomed here in Canada.
Mackenzie, as you know, we have an asylum system in Canada that is revered around the world. The United Nations has recognized for 2 years in a row that Canada is the #1 resettling country around the world. That is built on the strength of the compassion and generosity of Canadians to welcome the world's most vulnerable, including those who are fleeing war, persecution, and conflict. The claims are adjudicated by our Immigration Refugee Tribunal Board. That board has the capacity to deal with claims and will continue to adjudicate them in a non-political, independent manner. And we will ensure that the capacity is there to deal with all those claims as they come forward.
Another question from the room, David Thurton from CBC.
Hi, Minister. Maybe you could just reflect a bit. In many respects, Hong Kong was seen as the shining city or this example for a lot of the world, at least maybe economically. Did you ever think, as Minister, you'd be extending this hand to people being persecuted from that region?
Well, I begin by saying that there are a lot of things that I didn't contemplate when I was first sworn in as the Minister for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship a little less than a year ago, and it's hard to believe, but November 20th will be that one-year anniversary. And that was long before, I think, for many people, not only Canadians, but for people around the world, lives have been upended. I would say that in taking on this role, that I knew that a big part of the work that I would be contributing in government would be to respond to the needs of those who are seeking asylum. And that's one of the reasons why I think when this portfolio was created, when we first took the reins of government in 2015, that there was a very conscious and deliberate decision to include the word refugees as part of the file. And so it is very personal and very much an important part of the work that that I am contributing, along with many other colleagues, including my colleague Minister Champagne, Minister Gould, Minister Ng, Minister Sejan, a whole family of ministries who are very much concerned about migration and about those who need to seek asylum in Canada. But the important point, as I've said now on a number of occasions, is that we do this work with the support of Canadians. If we're revered, it's because Canadians recognize that this is the right thing to do, to extend a helping hand to those who are seeking asylum. And the other thing that I would say, that I would highlight, is that what we hope we accomplish out of today's announcement is that young Hong Kongers who are looking for a better life will see an opportunity to come, to work, to study, to bring their families, to contribute to our economy, and to build a better and brighter future for all of us. And that has been very much consistent with the relationship between our two peoples, and what I hope will be strengthened going forward.
Well, not so much a follow-up, but a different question. Your announcement today seems to be targeted at young Hong Kongers and professionals. What about their family members? What about the family members of these dissidents who, they will be leaving behind? Is there any measures to, and I'm not just talking about the wife, the kids, or the husband, or whatever. I'm talking about, maybe the auntie, the uncle, people who would also be victims of persecution because of the work that they've done. Is there any ramp to bring them to Canada?
Well, there's no government that has done more for family reunification in the history of country than ours. And there are many ways in which people can avail themselves of our immigration routes and pathways. And as I've said, we're all concerned about the situation in Hong Kong. And if you're eligible under one of the streams that I've outlined, you will be able to bring your immediate family members. This is consistent with our immigration plan. It's consistent with the way in which we hope to grow our economy by attracting people who possess the skills and the experience that are necessary to fill the urgent labor needs which are there today, and as well do so in conjunction with their family members. And as I've said now on a number of occasions, this plan is very much about strengthening the people-to-people ties, about expanding opportunities, and about building bridges between the people of Canada and Hong Kong.
Merci. Je pense qu'on n'a plus aux salles, donc on retourne maintenant au téléphone. Opérateur.
Thank you. Our following question is from Tanda McCharles from Toronto Star. Please go ahead. À vous la parole. Ms. McCharles, your line is open. You may proceed with your question.
Are you on mute, Tanda?
Yes.
It happens at least once every call. Okay, that did not sound like a mute.
Oh,
It's good. Are you there?
thanks, Minister. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Okay. I can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to pick up on some of the earlier questions that you've gotten about the thrust of these measures in terms of directly addressing the calls that you've heard to actually open up the refugee system to asylum claimants very directly from Hong Kong, the pro-democracy activists and their families who are seeking to leave. I understand that you're casting this as an in line with Canada's economic goals, but I'd like to understand about what you're doing from the humanitarian perspective for those pro-democracy activists.
Well, you're quite right that the focus of today's announcement is very much on expanding opportunities, creating a stronger pathway towards our economic recovery, and building that brighter long-term prosperity, which is very much the product of the ties that exist between the people of Canada and Hong Kong. But in addition to that, as I outlined in my remarks, there are a number of areas in which we are aligning our policies within the asylum system to reflect the situation in Hong Kong, including accelerating pre-risk removals for those who might otherwise not have been eligible. And by that, I mean those failed asylum claimants from Hong Kong. And we've also been very clear to underline that no foreign national will be disqualified from making a legitimate asylum claim by virtue alone of having been charged under the national security law or for applying to any existing immigration pathway by virtue alone of being charged under the national security law. And it's my understanding that this was indeed a concern that was expressed by the community.
Can you address the call you heard today from the group of MPs, the subcommittee from the Committee of Foreign Affairs? They have asked you to extend similar asylum pathways for Uyghur minority Muslims from the northwest of China. What are you going to do to ease paths for and help refugee claimants from that area of China, and what repercussions do you fear from the Chinese ruling party?
Well, we're gravely concerned with regards to the treatment of Uyghurs in China. And I know that my colleague, Minister Champagne, is directly engaged on this and, in fact, has been leading calls for access to the Xinjiang province. As I've said now on a number of occasions, we have a robust asylum system. Anyone can make a legitimate claim in Canada. They will not be disqualified by virtue of having been charged under the national security law alone, or as long as they have not committed any crime that would be recognized under Canadian law. And as you mentioned, I'm aware that there is a report that has been tabled by the Subcommittee on International Human Rights. We look forward to working with all the members of that committee and indeed all parliamentarians to address the human rights situation with the Uyghurs.
Operator, next question from the phone.
Thank you. Our following question is from Shelby Tevena from cbcnews.com. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Hello, Minister Mendicino. Thank you so much for taking my question. My question pertains to COPR holders around the world who were approved after March 18th, who are not part of the travel exemptions at this time. Are you able to comment on when this exemption will be lifted?
Well, first, we are very clear-eyed about the present moment that we find ourselves in, which is that we are in a second wave. And our top priority remains the health and safety of Canadians. And that is why we have taken the decision to ensure that our borders are safe by having travel restrictions. Whenever we have made decisions that implicate immigration policy, we have always done so by adding the requisite resources in terms of public health care and safety that are necessary. And with regards to those who had been issued a COPR prior to March 2020, as long as they meet all the other healthcare protocols, they will be able to enter Canada. And for those who were issued certificates of permanent residency and are not able to come to Canada, we are introducing the necessary flexibility in our policies to restore that status, as well as importantly making the necessary investments to add resources, to leverage technology, and to streamline our policies so that when we are in a position to reopen our borders, we will be able to do so by hitting the ground running. But we will always do it ensuring that we can protect the health and safety of Canadians first.
Thank you. Just one follow-up. So I was wondering if you were also able to comment on the status of online citizenship testing.
Well, I'm grateful for the question, if only because I've had the honor of participating in a number of citizenship ceremonies virtually, including on July 1st, where we hosted the first ever virtual citizenship ceremony simultaneously from coast to coast to coast. And I will say, as minister, there are very few other functions that are as special and as unique as being able to welcome a newcomer into the family of Canadian citizens. It's truly a profound moment. And with regards to virtual citizenship testing, that is something that my department is working very, very hard on to launch. And we hope to have to say more on that in the very near future.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you. Donc maintenant, on va prendre notre question finale. We'll now take our final question from the phone. Operator?
Thank you. Final question is from Amanda Connolly from the Global News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hi there, Minister. Thank you for taking our questions today. I know you've kind of been asked variations of this before here, but I wanted to just to clarify this. Are you anticipating backlash from China against Canadian passport holders who are still in Hong Kong? And do you believe right now that Canadians who are there face a greater risk today than they did yesterday?
Well, we are gravely concerned with the situation in Hong Kong, and we continue to monitor it very closely. We've introduced a number of very strong measures, including the suspension of our extradition treaty with Hong Kong, restricting the movements of goods, and also revising our travel advice to Hong Kong. Today's announcement is very much made against that backdrop and with that context in mind. But it's also about ensuring that those young Hong Kongers see today an opportunity to come to Canada, to work, to study, to build that next chapter in their life, which is in keeping with the traditional strong ties between our two peoples.
And to follow up on that, again, I know you've kind of touched on this before, but in terms of people who are not doctors, who are not nurses or pharmacists or hold a post-secondary education, that you could argue that those people are even more vulnerable to what's going on in Hong Kong right now. Do you plan to introduce, or are you looking at potentially modifying these measures any more in the future to give them a chance to come here as well?
We've built flexibility into this plan to meet the demands of that we will see unfold. We are very much looking to attract young, recent graduates from Hong Kong who may have skills that we can see applied in the healthcare sector. But I mean, there are other sectors, including increasingly the innovation and tech sector. And Hong Kong is well known as being a hub for technology and for innovation. And there too, I see an opportunity to expand the opportunities for those who have those skills to come to Canada. And this is one of the reasons why I think there is reason for hope and for optimism. Today's plan is in line with our immigration levels plan. It's about creating jobs. It's about accelerating our economic recovery. And it's about driving long-term prosperity by strengthening the ties between the people of Canada and Hong Kong. And we feel as though, we believe as though today is another important step in achieving that goal.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. This concludes today's press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci à tous.